Japan up close.
Well, my interest in Japan actually takes me back to my childhood years. While I was growing up, my father was collecting translations of Japanese poems and novels, and I grew up into it. And that was in the USSR, where you couldn't simply get on a plane and get to a place you are dreaming about. So it remained a kind of remote wonderland to which I wished to get and never could while I was a small child. So after growing up and moving to Israel and becoming a student at the Hebrew University, that craving to that far away wonderland revisited me, and I chose Japanese studies as a double major program along with anthropology. So that's how I got there. And finally, I had the opportunity to visit Japan as a student, and then was when the real life affair started. Well, as it all usually happens in anthropology, it came to me from the field. As a student at Doshishi University, I was taking an intensive Japanese course, and well, I needed a lot of caffeine to go on with my studies and to pass the exams, and I needed coffee shops to do my homework, and that's how I became fascinated with the Japanese coffee culture, coming from a place that considers itself very coffee-loving, Israel, our proximity to Italy and Turkey, etc. I was very surprised to discover Japanese coffee, and I realized that the more I looked at it, the more I discovered about the peculiar history of coffee in Japan, the amazing role of coffee shops in Japanese modernization, the kisaten as a kind of unique space, non-existent at other places. So I realized there was something interesting going on there. So when I was choosing my research topic for the my doctorate, that was the inevitable choice. So basically, I became interested both in the substance of coffee as a cultural commodity, as an acquired taste, and the space where coffee is taken, the coffee shop, as a type of public space where things happen. So my focus in the book is on a particular kind of coffee shops, and that's the coffee chains. Because while looking at the coffee culture in Japan, I was very surprised to see the very high popularity of the chain. So I asked myself, what is it that makes these places so relevant for the local coffee culture, which I discovered already was there and was elaborated and sophisticated and interesting. So basically, I deal with three domains. One domain is culture, and I trace the cultural baggage of coffee as an imported commodity, and the coffee shops as a foreign fad that infiltrated Japan during its modernization. And I look at that foreign order following coffee up to these days in the manner this very banal and accessible drink still retains kind of foreign aura. If we look, for example, at the names of the coffee shops and the music played there, et cetera, et cetera. So that's that cultural face of coffee in Japan. The other domain is the social face of coffee, and I'm trying to see how a simple cup of beverage can be translated into status, cultural capital, how drinking coffee can signal sophistication, expertise, certain belonging to a certain group or a tribe. And there I did a ethnography at coffee courses, mainly those held by the coffee chains, such as Starbucks that you mentioned. And I looked how people are being taught to drink coffee and what it means. And here gender emerged as a very central factor, because I realized that these were mainly women who were studying about coffee and incorporating it in their individual life routines and their self-perceptions, etc. So there I talk about status, I talk about cultural capital, etc. And the third domain is about the space of the coffee shops. And here I'm trying to see what kind of public space coffee shops offer that makes them important. In Japan, where people are moving in between their rather small homes and their rather demanding workplaces. And here we are talking about what is called the third place, a neutral place that offers a place to be in the city. So I'm looking at how coffee shops fill in that niche, and in particular, the coffee chains. And it is fascinating to see how a space that is uniform, standardized, faceless even, acquires relevance by offering a very important site for people in the city. And here again, gender comes up, because I realized in my interviews and my surveys that these were mainly women that found this space so so convenient and even soothing. So we have a neutral public space that allows people to feel private, allows privacy within the city, that caters to women in their offerings. And there's some very funny examples of how, for example, Starbucks items are being advertised as fitting female taste. And here I think the comparison between the chains and the Kisoten and the local coffee shops was very inspiring and allowed to see the diversity of places in the city that make people feel more comfortable with their public lives. Well, that's an interesting question, because in fact, in my dissertation, I did a comparison between coffee chains in Japan and in Israel. And what I found is that it is mainly the social space that differs. In a society like Israel, where people go out to socialize mainly, the coffee shops are sites of being together. While in Japan, I found that people are more seeking a place to be alone, to be comfortable, to a kind of extra living room that is perhaps not present in one's home. So I think in Japan, the chains cater much more to individual needs of people, of private people, than in other countries. And then, of course, there's something that you cannot overlook, and that's the quality of Japanese service. It is simply much, much better than anywhere I encountered. And that is definitely the kodawari that is being discussed in Japanese crafts or Kisoten culture definitely applies to those global actors as well. Yes, so I think indeed the main change is generational, and I do believe that the older generation still enjoys its coffee in the older way, black, playing with a cigarette and a newspaper, while the younger generation is exposed to a intense diversity of coffee styles, trends, etc. So I think the main shift is the diversity, because you can access any kind of coffee drink, from very sophisticated espresso to a milk-based beverage that is only remotely linked to coffee. But it makes coffee more accessible and more relevant to wider audience that 20 years ago wouldn't think of coffee because it was an old man's drink. So there is that diversity. And of course, I think in terms of lifestyle and material culture around coffee, there are many more opportunities. There's much more sophistication. And as I mentioned before, I think coffee correlates with desired lifestyles. It became an icon of a certain type of living. It could be through the media, it could be through peers. So it becomes more integrated in daily routines of people, but less as a caffeine drink and more as a lifestyle drink. Yes, indeed, coffee is closely related and is part of that global flow of commodities, capital, images, lifestyle trends, and Japan is today part of this global flow. So previously, during let's say the 20th century, Japan was mainly consuming foreign trends, and coffee as an important commodity was indeed part of that. I think today, similarly to other commodities and trends, Japan both consumes it, imports and consumes it, appropriates it, but it also exports it back to the West, because what we are seeing today is a very fascinating trend in which Japan remakes its coffee culture by infusing it with connotations that can take us to, for example, the world of tea, of green tea, the attention to detail, the manual preparation, the spectacle of making coffee, the material culture, all the devices made with a lot of expertise. So this new Japanese coffee culture is now being exported to New York, to London, to other places as part of this complex Japanese cultural production. So in that sense, I think while coffee is still not grown in Japan, the coffee culture is being produced here. And I think it will be on the rise.
Japan Up Close.